Hello and welcome to Kingston Libraries live Q&A session. We just want to really welcome you and thank you so much for all tuning in and carrying on supporting our libraries and our digital offer at this time. We've got a wonderful Q&A with Andrew Cartmel today, and we are really excited for that. If you do have any of your own questions, please do just pop them in the comments, and we'll be putting them across and we'll try and cover a few of those for you today. So I think nothing needs to be said further from me. If I leave it to our esteemed host Cameron to introduce himself and our wonderful guest. Thank you so much guys for tuning in. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, well, thank you to everyone who's tuning in right now. Joining us today is Andrew Cartmel, a former script editor of Doctor Who in between 1986 to 1989, and he's the current author of numerous works, such as his current novel series, The Vinyl Detectives, and he's joined us on this lovely sunny Saturday for a little interview chat. I myself am Cameron Stewart. I'm an avid reader, Doctor Who fan, actor, small part-time writer, and currently a hospital porter. Let's get down to talking. Is it Andrew, or can I call you Mr. Cartmel?
Andrew is fine. Thank you, Cam.
Thank you. I guess what would be quite good, I know there's going to be quite a few viewers tuning in who will know how you got the job of the script editor of Doctor Who, but there will be some who don't. I was wondering, could you just tell us the little story of how you became the script editor to begin with?
Well, I always wanted to be a novelist, and I thought it would be easy to support myself while becoming a novelist by writing TV scripts. What I didn't know at the time is that it's as hard to break into television as it is to sell a novel. But as a result of those scripts, I did get an agent, and my agent was personal friends with the producer of Doctor Who. So when John Nathan Turner was looking for a new script editor, he put the word out, and Richard, my agent, got us in touch, and we hit it off. So that's how it happened.
Okay. And there was a very famous quote that you said during your interview in regards to what you want to do with the show. I was just wondering if you could share.
Oh yes, it was actually, I'd completely forgotten that I'd said this to John, but Sylvester McCoy, who was soon cast as the new Doctor in those days, the Seventh Doctor, he heard about it, and years later he reminded me. And what I'd said, John had concluded our job interview, which had gone very well, with one of those classic job interview questions: if you could do anything you like with the show, what would it be? And I said, overthrow the government. I need to add two quick comments. That you have to remember it was the Thatcher government, and also I did misspeak, because when I said overthrow, what I actually meant was bring down. The distinction is that you bring down a government by legitimate means. In other words, you vote them out of power, for instance. Overthrow suggests violent rebellion, which wasn't what I had in mind, although it would have had its own appeal.
As many script editors of modern Doctor Who take the role quite active, and it's quite known that when you were script editor, you were far more focused on editing the scripts, getting the writers writing. Was this a conscious decision, or were you quite happy just to take a back seat and not write your own scripts for the show?
Because I was a writer who was trying to break into television at the time, I knew that it was tough, and I also had met a bunch of other writers who were in the same position, and so I took it upon myself to give as many new writers a break as I could. And from a financial point of view, that wasn't a great idea, because I should have written a load of scripts myself, because it would have been a permanent income stream. On the other hand, I did introduce a lot of very talented writers to television, which is something to be proud of.
Mm. And one of the things where you can read all of Andrew's stories is Script Doctor, an inside story. This is actually an old edition, because you recently had this reprinted, haven't you?
Yes, did we get the new one?
Unfortunately, I don't have the new one. This isn't even my copy. This belongs to someone who I've had for years, and I really could give it back to them.
I do have a copy of the new one, which I can show people at some point. But I will also mention that the reprint has almost completely sold out. So if you fancy a copy, go onto Twitter, do a search on me, and you'll find the publisher and be able to pick up a copy this weekend.
Because one of the things that really I mean, this cover's lovely. It has Sylvester McCoy with an alien-style background. Looks like a scene from an unviewed Doctor Who episode. But the current cover has a lovely 90s pop art to it.
Oh, shall I get it? Shall I?
Oh, if you're happy to, I think it's fabulous. So yes, this is, I believe, the third reprinting of Andrew's book. And it is honestly so just talk about it. Yeah, look at that.
There's a cover designed by Stuart Manning, who's also the publisher of it, and he's done a wonderful job. He really has. He's a brilliant designer. I knew him first as a designer before I knew him as a friend, and now a publisher. So that was cool.
I mean, there's a lot of nostalgia when I look at that. I just see my childhood television and adverts and that aesthetic oozing off the pages. But one of the things with the story is it's a memoir. As much as it's a memoir of your time with Doctor Who, you do kind of you do I don't think the best word to describe this. You do look back at the time and you philosophize about it, and you do go off on tangents, giving your own impression and interpretations on what you felt at the time. Is this how it was written when you jotted it down, or have you edited it since then?
I was very lucky in that I kept a diary for a brief few years in my life, and those years overlapped with working on Doctor Who. So what I did when I sat down to write the book, the diary wasn't just about, it was just about my life generally. So I isolated all the bits that were Doctor Who related, and I chose the best and most interesting ones. And it worked really well because I had sort of written in a journalistic way, as though I was, a guest on the Doctor Who production and observing things. So I'd written them down for posterity, never thinking that there'd be a book. But it's great that there is, because it's the next best thing to time travel. If you want to know what it was like making Doctor Who in the late 1980s, this is a really good little portal to that.
I just want to, I plug your book for a second, because I've read it, and one of the really fun things about it is that because you are new to the job, and that's very apparent in the memoirs, it's very accessible. Even, I mean, I speak as a Doctor Who fan, but I really do believe if you weren't a Doctor Who fan, you could access it as well, because it's all told from the point of view of someone who's discovering a brand new environment.
Exactly.
And I believe that anyone who's not a Doctor Who fan will get just as much enjoyment. It is just one person's point of view.
Yes, anybody who's interested in what it was like to be behind the scenes in a television production in that era. And we should also add, of course, that you can borrow this book from a good library near you. You don't have to buy it. By all means, do borrow it from a library. I can't tell you how important libraries have been in my life, and I would not be a writer without them. So, more power to the library.
Absolutely. Moving on with the television show, I'm going to take it as we're interviewing for a library and all about books. I want to just talk a bit about your time on the Virgin New Adventures. And for people who don't know what that is, after Doctor Who was cancelled in the 1980s, Virgin Publishing, spearheaded by a man called Peter Darwin-Evans, took up the editorial seat, and for 62 novels, I believe, continued the Doctor Who story, starting with the Seventh Doctor and Days, where it left off, and took it to all sorts of new and exciting places. Now, Andrew, you wrote 3 books, which actually coincidentally were all linked together. That was Warhead, Warlock, and Warchild.
My sister said if I wrote another one, I should call it Wardrobe.
Would that be a dystopian future where wardrobes are...
You go through the back into another world. No, that's...
Yeah, that'd be great. I guess one of the things was quite interesting was because obviously you had been the editor of the TV show, and while it is a different medium, these books weren't just standalone. They were trying to create their own continuity and exploration. What was that like, having Peter Darwin-Evans now in a position where he was kind of doing the job that you had done previously?
Oh, I didn't take to it at all, Cam. I've got to say, the initial offer on these books was that they were going to be more adult, that they were going to be longer. All the previous Doctor Who novels had just been novelizations, which is to say people had taken scripts and just turned them into books. But these were going to be original, they were going to be longer, and there was going to have more adult content, and the authors were going to have more creative freedom. Well, that creative freedom almost immediately got whittled away because Virgin Publishing got cold feet and decided that they didn't want these books going out just as individual novels. They thought they would be more commercial if there's some kind of linking story between the groups of books, which wasn't true. That made no difference at all in terms of sales. But what it did do is it spoiled some of the fun of writing these books, because you were notionally supposed to link, I was supposed to link my book, Cat's Cradle, with a couple other books, which were gathered under the umbrella title of Warhead. I dragged my heels and very sulkily did as little continuity as possible between the books, and because I do feel that everybody should have been able to write their own Doctor Who novel and just as a standalone thing. And indeed, soon enough, that whole notion of trying to link the books with continuity dropped away, fortunately.
It's I have read the 3 books, and yes, there is Cat's Cradle is very hard to call it a trilogy.
Attempt to link that book to a couple of other books.
Indeed, I don't actually even know what the trilogy is about. I know what the books are about, but I don't know what the trilogy is about.
You either do don't do it properly and link your books in a proper series fashion, and get the thing is, you want to get the same person to write the linked books. You don't want 3 different writers to have to try and do a half-hearted attempt at creating a continuum.
Absolutely. So I've just been sent a question here by Sam. He asked, Andrew, were there any interesting stories pitched for the final Classic Who season that ultimately weren't made, aside from season 27?
That we never had any fully formed stories because we weren't in a position to commission writers. So they were just bits and pieces of ideas. And hardcore Doctor Who fans will be aware of a company called Big Finish, which continued to keep Doctor Who alive on audio, even when it was off the air on television. And most of the most interesting stories from season 27 have had a new life in a series, I think called The Missing Adventures or The Lost Adventures.
Lost Stories, I believe.
Yeah, thank you. And I wrote a number of those, and Mark Platt did one, and Ben Aronovich did one. So if you're really interested in a detailed answer to that, I'd suggest having a listen to those. I did one which I'm very proud of called Animal. But the main thing that we had that me and Ben Aronovich and Mark Platt had come up with was an introduction of a new companion. That was about as far as we got. And we also kicked around some ideas for stories, just in very little detail.
I just to add in there's a fabulous, I don't know if I can link it a bit in Facebook, but there's a fabulous documentary where someone has done a bit of research and found all the potential stories that were going to be made, as tenuous as just a storyline that was suggested, and that was it. But I believe, if I'm correct, Mike Tucker and Robert Perry pitched under a pseudonym a story to you.
I think Mike Tucker did, in collaboration with a friend, did write something. And it was very honorable of him to put a pseudonym on it, because that way he wasn't trading on the fact that we were friends.
And I believe you can now buy that story. It's called The Legal Alien, published back in 2000, I believe. And you can get it now. They reprinted it back in 2009, if I'm correct. I might have my date wrong on that, but that's a very easily accessible one. And I believe another one was by Edward Young.
Well, Ed Young was, I remember Ed Young's name. I think he was a very good writer, yeah.
That's been turned into a Doctor Monthly story many years ago, and it's very scary, that one.
We had a lot of very talented writers, and it kind of broke my heart that I couldn't go on nurturing the writers we'd already used and also introducing some new writers to television. But the BBC, in its magnificent wisdom, had decided to kill the show off.
I mean, that's the story of so many fabulous TV shows, isn't it? Now, I have a question here, which is, I'm going to quote something that is by a YouTube reviewer called Popperine. I'm not sure if you've seen any of his work, Andrew Cartmel. He has a series where he's going through each Virgin novel story and reviewing it, talking about it. as a Doctor Who story in the wider context of the novel and what it meant for the whole series. And he said this very interesting thing in regards to the Seventh Doctor. He says, to quote him, that for you, your characterization of the Seventh Doctor in Cat's Cradle Warhead was directly from you. It's not through another writer. It's not under the approval of a disgruntled producer. It's not interpreted by an actor, but uncut, on tap, pure Doctor Who from the guy who once famously said that what he wants to do with the show is overthrow the government. And so, taking that quote, what I want to ask you is, who is your Seventh Doctor?
Oh, it's totally Sylvester. I mean, Sylvester, well, it's Sylvester by the time we had reached the end of the 3 seasons we worked on together, because our first season we were finding the way, and in the second season we really began to hit our stride, and in the third season we got it right. So with the help of some really talented writers and Sylvester himself, and of course Sophie Aldred, who has played the companion, we'd begun to develop, I think, a very interesting distinctive characterization which took the Doctor back to his roots.
Because one of the things with your novel is that the Doctor is considerably quite dark throughout the story. There are moments where it comes across that if you are not if he comes across a character and this character is not a wholly good person, if they have done something which they've kind of ignored a serious problem and not done anything about it, or they have done bad things in the past, he is not willing to help them in any way. Was that something that you directly tried to put forward in the show, or was
that one? He was like Santa Claus and keeping a list.
Yes, I guess so, yes. Except unfortunately you didn't get cold at the end of the day. You probably ended up in a far worse situation.
I always, it sounds a little bit odd, but I always thought the Doctor was like the Lone Ranger. He's the mysterious, enigmatic, unidentified hero who comes into town, sorts everything out, and then rides off again, leaving things behind better than they were before. I think he's a classic kind of maverick, loner, dispenser of justice. And when I say a loner, he's of course not a totally loner, because along the way he does always acquire companions who come and go.
Yes. I've had a number of questions. Just going back to those audio stories, Peter asked, how did you find the experience writing and adapting stories for audios?
For the ones with Sylvester and Sophie, it was really extraordinary, because we did those, it must have been decades after we'd done the show together. And I sat down in the recording studio on the first day that Sylvester and Sophie were going to begin, performing lines from my script. And as soon as their voices came over the intercom, it was like no time at all. It was like no time had elapsed whatsoever. It's just like being back working on the show. It was an extraordinary and very pleasant feeling.
What is we've got? We've got a question from Tim. Thanks for your time. If you had another season and did take the Seventh Doctor to Gallifrey, how would you approach the Time Lords as a writer and an editor, considering the changes that you wanted to make to the Doctor's origin and mystery?
I would never have done a Gallifrey-based story if I had my choice in the matter, because my feeling always was that the Doctor needed to be unique and mysterious, and the whole Gallifrey thing made him the opposite of those.
See. So, you're quite often associated with the Seventh Doctor, but I know that you've written for other Doctors. You wrote for Patrick Troughton's Doctor in the novella Foreign Devils,
right,
Telus Publishing, and Peter Davison's Doctor in another audio story called Winter in the Adept in 2000, and a handful of David Tennant Doctor Who comics. When you write for other Doctors, is it easy for you, or do you have to go and do research? Or?
Well, I'll always watch some of the episodes. Like I remember watching some Troughtons before I did that one. But that's usually more to lock on to the companions than to the Doctor himself, because the Doctor is, although he's always characterized slightly differently by different actors, at the core, there's still this really fascinating alien character who I think is amazingly interesting and very fun to write about.
Yeah. Question from Marie here. If you were asked to be the script editor of Doctor Who now, what would you
I'd get rid of the sonic screwdriver.
do? Would you, if they turned around today and said, we want you to be the new script editor, would you take it up?
I would love to have the chance again to bring some really good writers to bear, to bring back some of the great writers who worked on it before. I mean, the only one from my era who's come back again is the magnificent Rona Munro. Stephen commissioned her to do the Eaters of Light. Is that the right title?
Yeah.
She's first rate, so it was great to see her. But I mean, people like Mark Platt should be working on the show all the time. Ben Aronovich, if he had the time, could write a magnificent one. And Ian Briggs certainly didn't get enough bites at the cherry.
Now, I know that it's quite funny, we asked you, would you do the Doctor again? But I have actually recalled in an interview that you said you do feel you've done nearly all that you can with Doctor Who now. Would you actually, if someone turned around and said, we want you to write this for Doctor Who, would you do it, or would you?
If I did say I'd done everything I could with Doctor Who, I obviously misspoke, because the point about that character, about that the show, is that it's endlessly renewable. As soon as they made that crucial decision back in the 1960s, when Hartnell wasn't going to play it anymore, instead of killing the show, they decided they could just cast Troutman instead, and they could do this thing where the Doctor would regenerate whenever they wanted to recast. That, combined with the TARDIS, which allows you to go anywhere and any time, gives you infinite access to stories and an infinitely renewable story format. It's really very, very robust, and it could just keep going forever. So I don't think anybody could exhaust the Doctor Who stories.
I know we've got a question from Craig, but it's about the final detective. So I'm gonna just hold on your question a moment, Craig.
Craig. Yay. We're
definitely going to get to final detective. Lots of questions there. Where are we at the moment? 2 minutes past. So let me just have a look. Yeah, let's transition now away from Doctor Who a bit. But still with the Doctor Who question, but more into your tastes in films and books and things. You said that with all the Doctor Who stories that you have as a script editor, you wanted them to say something. Every story, you wanted there to be a message or something to say.
I think it's very dangerous to try and strain and present a message. But if it so happened that the writer was passionate about something and that could be put into the DNA of the story, then that was a big bonus.
What I wanted to ask you on that one then is, when you approach television shows, novels that you read, films, do you look for content that has something to say, or can you sit back and watch a bit of junk television every now and again?
I wouldn't call it, if it works for me, I'd never condemn it as being junk television. I just want something to be of a sufficiently, like if you're reading a book, you want a prose that does not go clunk. Ideally, you want to just be drawn in to the point where you're not even aware that you're reading the book anymore. So you need somebody who can cast that spell, who can spellbind you. And it's the same with a TV show or a movie. I'm just looking for something that will be of a sufficient caliber and lack of obvious artifice to draw me in. And then let's see what they do with that, like, whether they make me laugh or cry or whatever.
I think a lot of readers, all they ever want to do is find the best novel they can read. And I think I certainly find this, and I know a lot of people do, that when you find a book that you're not enjoying, it's incredibly disappointing. I
would never give a book more than about 10 or 20 pages, and if it doesn't grab you, life, not long enough to read it. We've all, when we were adolescents, trudged through 600-page classics, and then thought, well, was that great? Maybe it wasn't that great. I don't know.
It's great when you learn to get rid of a book that you're not enjoying, but
very freeing.
I've got a friend who recently just discovered this, and now she's so happy.
You should read it for pleasure, and you shouldn't feel ashamed if some magnificent masterpiece of literature just doesn't do it for you. I mean, for a start, it could be a dodgy translation, because a lot of the great books were not in English. So that there's that to be concerned about for a start.
Going on to, I mean, this is going to be a very bizarre question. You do strike me as a kind of left wing, would I say?
Well, that's I would have agreed with you before I became so angry at the Labour Party. So I would say that I'm generally opposed to whatever government is in power at a given time. But at the moment, we live in a world where the issues transcend party boundaries. I mean, we have an existential crisis in the environment. So frankly, we've all just got to cooperate. We've got to cooperate with people like Putin or, the regime in Beijing, because we all just have to work together to save the world, which seems like quite an important priority. So I think that national boundaries, frankly, they're yesterday. We all live on the same planet. I think that national boundaries are just lines on the map, and party divisions are even more foolish. I think there's just a divide between people who understand the urgency of the situation we're living in and people who deny it. And I suppose the only way around that is to try and educate those people. So I don't think we're even talking about party and left and right anymore. I think we're talking about fighting for survival.
You've mentioned Putin now, and you've mentioned Beijing. Immediately, this video is going to be flagged. There's going to be some Chinese office worker, someone now watching our interview. We've been got.
Let's hope he's a vinyl detective fan.
I know, isn't it? An avid reader. So yes, I guess the question I was going to ask you, and maybe this is something that you're going to say you once were. I was going to ask you, would you consider yourself a punk?
No, I was never a punk. I mean, even back then, I was listening to jazz and film music. So, and rock, sort of much more mainstream rock. I was never really that into punk, because I was looking for something that was more musically and lyrically sophisticated, if I may use that term.
I guess I was also wondering if you were a punk in the sense that you were against the system. You were maybe sometimes an anarchist, not in an extreme way, but in a...
No, I was never an anarchist. You have to remember that at the time I became politically aware, it was the Thatcher era, and you didn't really have to be left-wing or an anarchist or anything, not just to feel that something very unjust was happening in the country and just to oppose that. I mean, a lot of Tories felt that way too.
Well, let's move on to the vinyl detectives. And again, I suppose there's lots of great origin stories on how you got the part of the script of Doctor Who, and the story of how the vinyl detectives came about is a fabulous story. I was wondering if you could just recount it for our listeners.
Well, my friend Ben Aronovich, who worked on Doctor Who with me, had become a best-selling novelist, and he encouraged me just to write something that was really close to my heart, because he says that was the way to success. So I wrote about record collecting, combined it with a crime fiction, which I also adore. And so I started writing the vinyl detective novels. And I wrote one and sent it to my agent, who was just like, I don't know, but I was so on a, and it took 6 months, literally 6 months to the day, for my agent to read the book, and I was going nuts. So I thought the only way to stop going nuts was to throw myself into another project. So I wrote the second novel, and by the time I finished the second novel, I thought, I'm on a roll, and I wrote the third. So we ended up in a situation where I had 3 novels about this character and no book deal, and that for several years the novels stayed on the shelf because my agent made a very half-hearted attempt to sell them and did nothing with them. And then my friend Guy Adams just got in touch one day, and he said, "Oh, why don't you send them to Miranda Jewis at Titan? I think she'll like them." And I sent her the first book, and she said, "Oh, I'm very busy. I won't get to this for ages." And then a few days later, she got in touch and said, "Oh, I like this." And I said, "Well, there's 2 more. There's 2 more novels." And she read them. She was a wonderful, wonderful editor. She's now, I'm talking about her in the past tense only because she's now moved on to another publishing firm. She's a great crime fiction editor, Miranda. And she sent me this email that had 2 of the greatest sentences any any writer can ever hear it. She said, "We want to publish the books. We don't want any changes."
Oh, really?
And I can
Wow.
live with that. Thank you. Well, those words are such music to your ear if you're a writer.
Yeah, well, I mean, normally that you would be asked to change a huge portion of the book for a publisher. It's
I
amazing.
made huge changes purely on my own initiative. When the book didn't set the world alight, I went back to the first novel and I cut 30,000 words out of it. It's still a long novel, but that'll give you some idea of how much too long. And some of that was good stuff, but it was just too much stuff.
So I've got the book here,
Yay.
Violent Detectives, written in dead wax. Had a good read of it over the last couple of weeks. I mean, one of the things is obviously Ben Aaronovitch, Write What You Love, very close to Write What You Know as well. For anyone who doesn't know, it's the idea that if you are struggling for inspiration or you don't know what to write, or maybe you're writing something and you don't know a lot about it, it's the idea that go back to what you know and you'll be able to put a lot more energy into writing that than writing about something that you
Yeah, and
haven't
also
seen.
you'll write it with much greater vividness and authenticity than something that you just, not that people don't make things up. I mean, historical novelists, get into that world and do an amazing job of creating it. But, don't try that at home. If you're just starting out, it's always a good idea to find something in yourself which you think will resonate with other people, but is something that's very much true to your own concerns.
Mm. I mean, one of the things, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, one of the things, obviously, vinyl collecting doesn't necessarily at first strike as an exciting thriller. But what I can say is definitely very exciting. And I think part of that is the fact that you are pouring your love into this book, but you've also managed to bring in this lovely thriller element into it. And suddenly you make vinyl collecting seem like one of the most dangerous tasks in the world.
The thing is, thrillers very often hinge on a MacGuffin, on some item or a concept or person that sets the story in motion. The thing that everybody's looking for. And in several of my books, it's a rare record, but the principle of the thriller remains the same. The fact that it happens to be a record, or a rare statuette, as it is in Hammett's The Maltese Falcon,
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. It's just it just is the object of desire that people are after.
And of course, this isn't the first time that you've included jazz, just to bring it slightly back. I've got Ackenbonn's Blues here, which has a lot of jazz-centric characters in them.
I think Duke Ellington and his orchestra appear at one point.
Blimey, it had to be about 10 years since, maybe 15 years since I read that one. But where does your love of jazz start then? What's your earliest memory of discovering jazz and enjoying
Well, I
it?
think it probably came to me through my love of film music, soundtracks, because the original Casino Royale, which is not the the Daniel Craig one, it was a movie way back in the 60s, had a wonderful score by Burt Bacharach, very jazzy kind of score. And also a James Bond movie called Thunderball. Again, I got the music for that. It was kind of strong big band jazz. And most of all, the music for a TV show called Mannix by Lalo Schifrin, which is fantastic West Coast jazz. And so I didn't really know I was listening to jazz. I just knew I was listening to this stuff and I loved it.
Lovely. One of the things, just a little question I want to ask, cactus needles, can they really be used to play vinyls?
Yes, absolutely. If we're talking about 78 RPM records, these are old-fashioned records, folks. And when you see those big record players with an enormous horn on them, that's what we're talking about here. They often wound them up by hand, and the records only lasted 2 or 3 minutes at most. But you had to replace the needle every time. It got worn out every time. And one way of doing that was just to have a cactus and just snap the cactus needles off and use them. That's absolutely true.
I'm sorry to confuse anyone who's wondering why on earth I asked that question. It's because one of the characters in this is mad about collecting cactus needles to play his vinyls, and it's made me wonder for 15 years. So I'm really glad I managed to ask that question finally. Are you about to get some cactus needles?
No, I was just going to say that in one of the later books,
Yeah.
in fact, in this book, which I'm just reaching for now, I think the cactus needle anecdote gets recycled. Sorry, apologies to anybody who reads both books.
Wonderful. I was a former bookseller myself, for about 8 years.
Very good job.
Thank you. One of the really exciting things to do was always to pitch. How do you pitch a story to a customer? How do you entice them in the quickest amount of time possible, get them to buy the book? I was wondering if you're interested and be willing to, if you would like to, maybe, Andrew, how would you pitch your book to someone? And then I will give you my little pitch.
Well, I'd say that the appeal of these novels is not that they're thrillers full of suspense and mystery, although they are. It's that they feature a cast of characters that the readers will fall in love with. And if you pick up one of these books, and if you enjoy it at all, you will find that those characters become like friends to you and you want to pick up another one. So I think the appeal is all down to, it's like finding new friends and having a gang. You'll feel like you're part of a gang and enjoying that. And also, I'd recommend it to cat lovers, my books. The warning, these books may contain cats.
I can vouch for that. I'm also a cat lover, and there are definitely cats in this book. And what's quite interesting is, I know you've mentioned this in another interview I researched. You mentioned how not to write a novel. And what's fabulous about that book is they specifically say, do not put a cat in the book. And what it's actually saying is that a lot of writers who put cats in their books, they only do it to make the main characters look good. Because they think if they have a cute cat, people will love my main character, and instead it just looks obtuse and in your face. But actually, that's not the case with your book. Your cats are very realistic, which is, they want attention, but they're also standoffish, but food comes first as well. And I think the cats in this are amazing.
Little critters, but they are also, gruesome killing machines if you happen to be a very small mammal or bird.
I've just noticed, hang on, I've got to do my pitch now for the book. So what I would have said to customers, I would have said, our main character is down on his luck. Central heating's gone, his first cat's just died, and suddenly a lady turns up and she has a card that he wrote when he was drunk.
Mysterious, beautiful lady.
Mysterious, beautiful lady. His card says he's a vinyl detective, and what follows is a dangerous but fun and eccentric quest for a very rare vinyl.
Quest is a good word for it, yeah.
And I would hope that would entice people. I could see myself easily selling this to so many customers if I was still there now.
Thank you.
Wanted to ask as well, because when I was coming up with my questions to ask you today, I was thinking, okay, yes, let's ask about the main character. And then I thought, what's his name? And I thought about it, and I had to look through it. And am I right in believing you don't actually name him? Is that correct?
Yep, 6 books in, still no name.
No name.
And I didn't set out to do that. I sort of started writing the book in the first person without worrying about the name. And I reached a certain point and thought, because it's in the first person, he doesn't really need a name. And it's very effortlessly avoid that. It's not difficult to avoid situations where his name has to be spoken. And I garnered confidence from the fact that other very fine novelists had already done this. Len Deighton did a series of spy novels in the early 60s, starting with the Ipcress File, in which that character, again, is a first-person viewpoint. He has no name. Became known as the Nameless Operative. And Dashiell Hammett, who I mentioned before, who I think is the greatest crime novelist of all time, he had a character called the Continental Op, who worked for the Continental Detective Agency, and he was also nameless.
I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you, and obviously here you've given inspiration as to where you came up with that idea. One of the things that really made me think was The Prisoner, in the way that main character has no name.
That's a very interesting comparison, Cam, because I am a big Prisoner fan and I'd never made that connection.
Well, I'm also a big Prisoner fan, and if we have a really good time, maybe I can ask you a few questions, but I'm going to stick with the vinyl detective for the moment. Now, let's ask Craig's question. He said, Craig's getting the shakes on now. He's asking, how much longer until we have some more vinyl detectives in our lives?
Well, I really want to see a book published this year, and I don't want to make any promises I can't keep, but I would love it if a book came out this summer. So let's just, keep watching, because I watch the skies, but much more easily, just watch my Twitter feed and I'll keep you posted about that. I'll have to finish it first. I'm still working, but I do want to get it out because I don't want 2021 to pass without a vinyl detective novel published. So, keep your fingers crossed and keep watching. And I just wanted to say that the book, as it's taking shape at the moment, is a lot of fun. I perhaps shouldn't tempt fate like that, but to anybody who reads the Vinyl Detective, I got to say that Tinkler's got completely out of hand in this one.
Oh, fabulous. One of the things really strikes me is the Vinyl Detective, our main character, and Nevada. Very different characters, certainly in the first book, very different characters, and there's this lovely juxtaposition between the two of them. They almost don't work, but work at the same time. Was that a deliberate choice to have contrasting characters?
Well, yeah, I sort of lucked into that because it's sort of like he's a nerd and she's an action hero. Because, and then at a certain point I realized, and it was only after I'd written several books, I realized that I was writing thrillers with this really competent action hero character, but it wasn't the guy, it was his girlfriend. And I thought, well, that's fairly fresh. I mean, there might have been a few other series like that, but not to my knowledge. It was, anyway, it's still a relatively different take on things. Instead of having, the big masculine guy who kicks down doors, my guy sort of waits outside while his girlfriend kicks down the door.
One of the things you really capture is the very eccentric and bizarreness that the British culture has in regards to charity fairs and charity shops and car boot fairs and all sorts of things.
Well, we were talking about cats. My cat's just come in. She's just, now would be a good time to hassle me, to hit me up with some food. So I'll do the best I can, fending her off while we continue.
Oh, lovely. I guess my question was, I mean, you do describe some of these settings in not always in the best light. The big fair, bootleg fair, car boot fair, sorry. You have the main character being shoved over by a very aggressive person. You describe the vinyl fair stall holders who are men who haven't washed that morning and you can smell it.
I don't think that I'm entirely unfair about that.
I guess that's a lovely
yeah. Well, that's sort of true to a certain aspect of record collecting, but it's not the only aspect to it. He also goes to some very lovely places.
I guess for me that was one of the things that made me really believe that this was real. That you're not just some person trying to plug the world of vinyls, or someone who's saying, "No, this is what it's really like being a vinyl collector, and it's not always fabulous, but sometimes it's great, but other times it's a bit smelly."
The thing that mustn't get lost is that vinyl is just a means to an end. It's a means to listening to music, and it just so happens that it sounds better than anything else that is easily available to any human being. So a good vinyl system will sound more like the musicians actually being in the room playing the music, which is what you're always aiming for. So that's one saving grace about this character, is that he's not collecting these records so he can file them away on his shelf and cross them off a list. He's doing it because he wants to hear the music, and that's a very important distinction.
This is also a question I had was the sweet spot, as it's called.
Oh, I'm sitting in it now.
You're sitting in there. So for people who haven't read this book, one of the characters has a vinyl system and speakers, and apparently a very particular part of the sofa is the best place to listen to whatever sound is emanating.
That's just about if you're playing records in stereo, you have two speakers, and depending on where they are, you're either getting the true stereo image, which again makes you sound like you're actually in the room, or you're not quite getting it. And it so happens with these particular speakers, you sit in the middle of the sofa and lean forward a bit, and you'll be in the sweet spot.
I mean, one of the things that really strikes me is that there's obviously a huge love of vinyls for you. Is that presumably your preferred medium to listen to music in, is it?
Well, just to sort of give myself a plug, I'm going to be start doing a jazz radio show quite soon. And for that, I've been madly going through my CD library, and I've been thanking my lucky stars I didn't get rid of my CDs, because what you need to do is, to cut a long story short, you need access to them on your computer to play in your show. And although it's conceivable you could do that with vinyl, it would be a lot more faffing than getting a drive, putting a CD in it, connecting it to your computer, and then just copying it onto your hard drive. So I do listen to vinyl. It is my preferred way of listening, but that's not to say that CD doesn't have its virtues too. And I do, if I'm very, very busy, I'll stick a CD on, because then I don't get up every 20 minutes to turn the record over, like if I'm working very intensely on something. But I always find listening to CDs, quite soon it gets fatiguing, whereas I could listen to records all the live long day.
Okay. Now, I've noticed we've almost come to the end of our little interview. Now, I know
Matt will be very pleased about that.
I know Sam, who asked a question previously, has just asked another question, going back to Doctor Who briefly. He says, sorry about the further Doctor Who question, but how would you have developed Ace and her relationship with the Doctor ahead of her departure in season 27? His treatment of her is evidently somewhat abusive. Watching the show would the end point of her evolving perception of him have been, and how would he have changed, if at all?
Well, forgive me, I would take issue with the notion that his relationship with her was ever abusive. That certainly wasn't our intention. If it ever came across that way, we owe you an apology. Mark Platt and Ben Aronovich had dreamt up this notion that Ace should leave the series to join the Prydonian Academy, which, if I got that right, basically it means it's the Time Lord Academy, and she would become a Time Lord or Time Lady herself, which would have been a really nice way of writing that character out, because it would have done honor to what a great companion she was. She is one of the great companions in Doctor Who.
Well, if you're happy to end it there, Andrew, I think we will call it a day on that interview. I'd like to thank Andrew for coming on and having a chat with us. So all of his vinyl detectives are available still in print. You can get them at your local libraries. If you would like to own copies, there are lots of obviously reputable online booksellers such as Waterstones, Wordery, Book Depository, High. And also, if you are interested in learning about his time and his thoughts on the show of Doctor Who, Script Doctor, which does not have this cover. Also, there we are. Thank you very much, Andrew. You said you can go to your Twitter, is it?
Well, that would be an easy way of finding it. The publisher's called 10 Acre Films. If you look up my name or 10 Acre Films on Twitter, as I said, I do encourage people to borrow it from the library, but if you'd like to own a copy, I'd advise buying it now, because we're down to the last couple dozen.
Lovely. Is there plans for a reprint? Or?
Not for a while. We've done, we did quite a big print run, and it sold out very quickly, and we will eventually do some kind of deluxe edition, but it's going to go back out of print again for a while. So if anybody wants to snap up one, now would be a good time. But again, I stress the fact that people should go to their libraries and borrow it from there. You don't have to own it to enjoy it.
And anyone interested in some of Andrew's audio work with Big Finish, all of the audio stories he wrote are still available. And unfortunately, your Doctor Who stories will have to be purchased secondhand if you can find a lovely price. Because some of them are going quite a lot of money going for some of your books.
Don't spend a lot of money on those books. Seriously.
No, if you're getting a cut, that's what you meant to say. Yes, spend a lot of money if I'm getting a cut of it.
You did mention The Prisoner. It's worth looking up my Prisoner novel, Miss Freedom, which I think is
still available.
Quite proud of that, and it is still available. Yeah.
That's available from the publisher. I always get the pronunciation wrong. It's
Powys, P-O-W-Y-S.
Pow. Okay, I have been saying it right then. Pow Media. Or you can go to lulu.com, which is the printer that is printing that book, and you can get it from there. Simply type it in Miss Freedom or Andrew Cartmel should find you. Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cartmel. We hope you have a lovely day. Liz has rejoined us to send us off.
Hey, Liz.
Hello. Thank you so much for such a wonderful interview, gentlemen. I'm very sorry to Andrew's cat, who is desperate at the moment, chomping at the bit.
She's been scratching the sofa. I'm sitting on this leather sofa, which has been
Oh,
cured by her little claws because she wants her meal.
can we ask the cat's name?
Yeah, cat's called Jade.
Oh, okay, lovely.
Jade, 30 seconds more, my love, I promise. Yeah, we'd just like to thank Kingston Libraries for everybody tuning in. Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us. We really appreciate your time today, and you, Cameron. Thank you so much both for a wonderful interview. Books, as have been said, are available at your local libraries, and you can always come with us, or of course we always support our wonderful local Regency bookstore, and we have links in the description for places you can access these fantastic novels. So we just say once again from Kingston Libraries, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thank you, gentlemen, for a wonderful interview. I have been cackling away on mute. Yeah, we look forward to more. We definitely are looking forward to more Vinyl Detectives, especially Craig, who is absolutely climbing the walls apparently.
As soon as I can finish it, Craig. Thank you for your encouragement, though. It really means a lot to me.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much again, gentlemen, and yes, thank you everybody for tuning in. Take care. Bye.